The changes that we're seeing now are happening at a rate I've never seen before in my 33-year career.
Your peak demand has increased nearly 11% in the last 4 years. Indications suggest that's not reversing anytime soon.
Every time we hear the latest forecast, the numbers get higher.
The strategy, the playbook that you're deploying to ensure that those prices do stay low while you are working to meet load growth.
We have a pretty diverse resource mix. Coal and gas generation normally has fuel available, but we also have a tremendous amount of wind energy. It comes with no-cost fuel. You get optimization and you get cost certainty, which creates a more certain portfolio of generation.
Hey everyone, and welcome once again to Power Perspectives. I'm Kinsey Grant Baker. Let's jump right in with this one. How about getting a peek inside how one of the nation's most important RTOs is thinking about modern grid building? What about learning the ins and outs of its expansion into new markets and efforts toward innovating T&D as we know it? If that sounds good, I have the conversation for you. Today, I am welcoming onto the show Lanny Nickell, President and CEO of Southwest Power Pool, SPP. On a daily basis, Lanny and his team are responsible for ensuring 18 million people across 14 states from Texas to North Dakota get power reliably. He's been at SPP for nearly 2 decades, so I'd say he knows a thing or two about the effort, innovation, and perseverance it takes to make that happen. But how might that effort, innovation, and perseverance be changing to meet the modern needs of a power system in flux? That's what we're talking about today with an inside look at SPP's strategy straight from the top. Lanny, welcome to Power Perspectives. How are you today?
I'm doing well, and thank you, Kinsey. It's good to be here.
I'm excited for our conversation. You mentioned as we were chit-chatting before I started hitting record that you're coming off a big week. It's been busy for you. Had a board meeting. I'm sure we'll get into some of the details on that. But I appreciate you taking some time to join us today and take a little chunk out of your busy schedule.
Yeah, absolutely. You're talking about a topic that I love talking about, so couldn't be happier to be with you today.
Wonderful. So if we both love it, let's dig right in. I think that we can start this conversation in a lot of ways. The way that I would like to propose is if we start with the sort of 30,000 foot view. If you had to describe, what makes SPP tick, what is your service territory like? Who's it made up of? What makes it special? What's kind of your elevator pitch for that?
I think what makes SPP special is our collaborative environment. We have hundreds of stakeholders. That includes both members and customers, and even occasionally the regulators. We kind of view all of those as our stakeholders. And we'll have hundreds of stakeholders in the room with us as we're making really, really critical policy decisions that help SPP assure it can continue to serve 18 million customers reliably and affordably in the future. And so I think that's what makes us tick, is just the fact that we have so many passionate people in our rooms and our meetings, and they really care about doing the job of keeping the lights on.
Yeah, it's good. It's good to start with that because I think it tees us up for really the nature of this conversation is that we are in a moment where a leader like you, SPP, like any peer that you might have, right? You're facing some really big decisions, facing some really big challenges, and trying to meet them in a way that balances technology with reliability and affordability and all of those big words that we love to use here. So I would love to talk a little bit more about some of those, big challenges and decisions. Large loads, data centers, hyperscalers, these are front of mind for everybody listening to this, and I'm sure front of mind for you and your team as well, especially the growing impact that they're going to have on demand. Peak load in SPP is expected to increase a good amount over the next decade to 105 gigawatts, I believe, from about 56 gigawatts. Your peak demand has increased nearly 11% in the last 4 years. Indications suggest that's not reversing anytime soon. So can you tell me a little bit more to kick us off here on the theme of big decisions and big challenges? What's driving that increase? And have you seen an influx in, hyperscalers or big, centralized large loads looking to connect? How are you viewing this challenge right now?
Well, let me just say this. You spoke about my 2 decades in the industry. You were very kind. It's actually been 3 decades. And the changes that we're seeing now are happening at a rate I've never seen before in my 33-year career, which makes it challenging to try to address those changes, but it also makes it really exciting. I think these are exciting times and the opportunities are huge. You talked about hyperscalers and large loads, and you mentioned 105 gigawatts of latest projected growth. We currently have about 56 gigawatts of load today at our peak. And I'll tell you, ask me next week what that forecast is. It's only getting higher. Every time we hear the latest forecast, the numbers get higher. And it is. I'll tell you, for SPP at least, a large part of that load is coming from electrification of oil and gas production. In our footprint, in our 14 state footprint, we have the Balkans and we have the Permian Basin, which are huge, huge producers of oil and gas in our country. And a lot of those oil and gas producers are wanting to electrify. So that's about 45% of at least our current and latest load forecast. Another 25% does come from data centers. So clearly, data centers are interested in locating in the SPP region, primarily because we have some of the lowest wholesale prices of electricity in the country. And retail rates are among the lowest in the country. So that's very attractive to a lot of these data centers. We have clean energy. A lot of them are driven by that. But more importantly, we also have reliable energy that can be provided through the combination of renewables and gas generation, for example, that can quickly back up the wind when the wind doesn't blow or the sun when the sun doesn't shine. So that's the biggest majority of the driver behind the load growth that we're seeing: oil and gas production, electrification, data centers, and then another 25% from industrial and manufacturing load growth.
So you mentioned that part of why SPP is attractive for, obviously there's the geographic element of being near to where you are, but when you talk about low wholesale prices and low retail prices, can you explain a little bit more what enables those low prices? Can you give me a little bit more context on, the strategy, the playbook that you're deploying to ensure that those prices do stay low while you are working to meet a load growth that, to your point, is increasing on a daily basis?
I think there's really probably three main factors of our wholesale energy prices and why they're so low. We have a pretty diverse resource mix. We still have a large amount of coal and gas generation, which is thermal and dispatchable. That's that's the relevance of that type of generation for us, is it's dispatchable. It normally has fuel available when you need fuel. But we also have a tremendous amount of wind energy, and wind energy um, comes with no cost fuel. Right, when the wind blows, that's really cheap. And so that combination of a really diverse resource mix is a huge driver for the low wholesale prices that we have. And then we have a tremendous transmission grid that we've worked hard to optimize over the last really 20 years. And that transmission grid has enabled the delivery of that generation to the load centers that need it. And of course, when you have that kind of transmission in place, you're more likely to get the economic energy that you need. And then, of course, you have the market. Our market that is in place is what allows us to assure we are dispatching the cheapest energy possible, whether it's in North Dakota, whether it's in Louisiana, Arkansas, wherever it's at, our market's going to find it. It's going to dispatch it, and the transmission that we've built over the years is what allows it to be delivered reliably.
Yeah, and those last 2 specifically, optimizing the transmission grid, the market that you have created, I wanna definitely dig into those a good deal in this conversation. But I would love to just hear from a leadership perspective. You mentioned the role of thermal and coal alongside things like wind, to have those dispatchable resources in addition to renewables. What is it like leading SPP to deal with the dual pressures that exist of, the Trump administration's stated priorities regarding energy with what I imagine is a significant amount of pressure to electrify, pressure to focus on renewables and clean energy? How do you balance those 2 things to ensure that you are, meeting the expectations and exceeding the expectations of the customers that you work with?
Well, one of the things that, as a leader of SPP, I've really been focused on is to do a better job of communicating, uh, telling the story that we have to tell, which is a story of fact. And I think as long as the key decision makers, elected officials, those that are having to make decisions, but yet don't really understand what they need to understand in order to make the right decisions, that's where SPP can play a huge role. We can provide information that assures those decisions are informed decisions. And so, it's really important for those decision makers to understand the value of having an all of the above approach. It's important for them to understand that when the wind isn't blowing and the sun isn't shining, that you have to have something else to back up that generation. It's a matter of protecting lives through reliable service, and that's what we got to do a really good job of as an industry, is telling that story and making sure people understand.
Right. And so often I hear from people that the story that this really all boils down to is the bill that ends up on in an email inbox or on a desk at the end of the month. When we're talking about the element of affordability and SVP's role in ensuring the affordable element of a reliable, resilient, and affordable grid, I want to hear a little bit more about how you're thinking about affordability. Balancing different sets of priorities, meeting high impact large loads, the electrification of oil and gas with the end customer and their needs and their expectations. I would also kind of root this in a statistic here that I pulled. The total savings and benefits for SPP's members in 2024 was 3.9 billion compared to 187 million in net revenue requirement costs, a benefit to cost ratio of 21 to 1. So tell me a little bit more about how that happens and how you're thinking about the decisions that you're making as a leader as they impact affordability down the line.
Well, I tell you how that happens. It's actually, I think the best way to say it is it's because of our regional approach that we are able to generate the kinds of benefits and savings that we do. If any utility or any state wanted to try to do that on their own, they would have far fewer resources that they can access to make that happen. And it's because we have such a large footprint with access to a diverse set of resources, that we're able to generate those kinds of savings. And that's why it's so important to tell that story of how important it is to work together. Our mission statement is working together to responsibly and economically keep the lights on today and in the future. And I continually stress that none of that on the back end of that statement happens. The keeping the lights on without first working together, and it's the power of community, power of together, and that's how we provide the savings that we provide.
Right. And there's the spiritual together, but there's also the physical together. So we can use this moment to talk more about optimizing transmission, which I know is something that has been a really big priority for SPP. Big part of meeting customer needs, meeting this growing demand, is ensuring that the infrastructure is in place to get electrons where they need to be. So let's talk about some of those physical elements of planning for the future. Between 2015 and 2019, SPP's members placed $3.4 billion dollars of new transmission projects in service, which will result in more than $27.2 billion dollars of benefits over the next 40 years. What's the game plan for infrastructure investments from the top? What are your priorities right now? How do you ensure that the right kind of money gets spent in the right ways to ensure that there is that outsized benefit for the investments that are being made in optimizing transmission?
Just yesterday, our board of directors approved a portfolio of transmission upgrades that altogether are estimated to cost about $18 billion. That's the entire portfolio. They also agreed to move forward with construction of about $9 billion of that. So the benefit to cost ratio of those projects is between 12 to 1 and 18 to 1. That means for every dollar of that investment, and we know that's a large investment. I mean, we're talking billions of dollars. But for every dollar of that investment, we expect to see 12 to $18 of return on investment. That's a great investment. I guarantee you, you and I both would love to find stock that we could invest in that would provide that kind of return. And that's just the economic savings. The reliability benefits are huge. We know that you have to have transmission to keep the lights on. The fact that we can do this, keep the lights on with transmission and provide the kind of savings that we're providing is really a 2 for 1.
Yeah. Yeah, or an 18 for 1, right?
Even more. That's right. Yep.
So
You're
so
getting both.
what
And by the way, the benefits of reliability, those are hard to measure. I mean, if you think
Yeah.
about what happened during Winter Storm Uri, 250 lives were lost. How do you put a value on that? How do you put a value on keeping the lights on when the weather's extremely cold or extremely hot? We don't try to put a value on that, but it's there, and that needs to be well understood.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's also interesting to hear the high level of a certain budget that gets approved, of certain planning that gets approved. I would love to hear a little bit more about what some of the specifics are that you feel excited about when we're talking about transmission upgrades and investments. Is it building new? Is it investing in what already exists to improve it or modernize it? What's your strategy? What's your thinking there on the best ways to literally optimize the transmission grid?
Well, it's going to take both of those, and I'm excited about all of it. And here's why it's going to take both. The portfolio that I just described to you is going to require a lot of new build, and new build takes years before it's in place. And in our footprint, it doesn't take as long as it takes in other parts of the country. We expect some of these large transmission lines that are in this portfolio to take 7 to 8 years to get built. So, what do you do in the meantime? That's where you have to optimize the current grid that you have. And so you need to do both. You need to find ways to optimize what you have, whether that's through improved operation of the grid enhancing technology. There's all kinds of new ways that are being thought about to do that. But it's going to take both because we got challenges today. Those challenges are going to continue over the next 7 to 8 years. But we got to start now.
Yeah, right. The best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago, right? I would love to talk a little bit about some news that came out not too long before we're having this conversation, that SPP filed plans with FERC to merge your transmission planning and generator interconnection processes. Something that is outside of the norm. It's a little bit unprecedented here. Can you tell me a little bit more about the reasoning behind this or the strategy behind this consolidated planning process or CPP?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up. It's one of my um, prouder moments as an employee of SPP. It was actually a concept that was born 4 to 5 years ago, and we diligently worked that concept through our stakeholder process. We built support along the way, and by the time our board was asked to approve it, 100% of our stakeholders supported it. So there was no doubt in my mind that it's the right thing to do. And it made it an easy decision for our board to approve. And then, of course, we were able to file it at FERC last week. But what it does is it allows us to really do two things. It allows us to provide those customers who are wishing to interconnect new generation to the grid cost certainty. That is something that has not existed to this point. And that lack of cost certainty is what has introduced so much speculation into the generator interconnection processes that transmission owners and RTOs are administering today. There's no cost certainty. So people have to guess at where to put the new generation and where to request it. And then it just creates a lot of churn, a lot of iteration in the planning studies that then follow. But with us, with what we're proposing, they will know 90% of the cost of interconnecting a new generator up front. And that's what we call our grid connection rate. So they'll know what it costs. And based on that cost, they can decide to enter into the study. And then, of course, the second benefit of this study process is the fact that because we're studying the needs to serve new load, we're studying other reliability needs. At the same time, we're studying the generator interconnections. we will end up with a portfolio of projects that are a lot more optimal than if we were to do those studies as are being done today, and that's separately and independently. So you get those two benefits. You get optimization and you get cost certainty, which creates a more certain portfolio of generation. It's good for everybody. It's good for load serving entities. It's good for ratepayers. It's good for generators. And this is something that we think is going to provide just a tremendous amount of value. On top of that, generator interconnection customers will be able to get the generator interconnection agreements, which gives them the rights to connect within 7 months. That's world record breaking speed right there. In the past, the old process that I talk about that's very iterative and induces a lot of churn has taken 4 to 5 years. And we're talking about being able to do this in 7 months.
Yeah. That was my follow-up is how does this impact queue and wait times to connect to the SPP grid? It sounds like it will expedite them significantly.
Very significantly, yes.
And how long will it take for that to happen? Do you have any prediction on when this kind of comes to fruition?
Yeah, we're actually planning to, we hope to get a favorable ruling from FERC. That has to happen first. That's step one. And we hope to get that early next year. And then we will immediately begin to introduce it into the planning studies, with the hope being that we will have our first portfolio from that new process in 2027.
Okay. Now, a lot of this obviously takes into account that much of the job of a utility leader is doing their best to predict the future. Certainly, an interesting element of the conversation around large loads and how it might impact transmission planning is whether or not this demand will actually show up and want to connect to the grid. So, I would love to hear your perspective on, whether there is the possibility that we're building for a peak load situation that may never really materialize. What's your thinking on doing your best to predict demand, knowing that it might not all show up when it says it's going to.
I've heard many people talk about load forecasting, and everybody that I've heard talk about load forecasting tells me that you need to forecast often because the minute you produce a forecast, it's wrong. So what we don't know is the load going to actually be higher than what we're forecasting, or is it going to be lower? I personally think it's probably going to end up being higher. But all we can do is because of the long lead time to get these transmission assets in place, you have to get started. We can't afford for the load to show up and then deal with the reliability implications of that for 7 years. You have to get started now, anticipating that that load will in fact show up in accordance with your latest forecast. And what we can do to mitigate the risk of spending more on transmission than we should is just continue to monitor that. And most of the cost of these transmission lines that will be built and will take 7 to 8 years to get built, most of those costs come on the back end of that, not on the front end. So there's very little risk associated with the cost part of that on the front end. So we've got time to kind of monitor this, track it, make sure that the load is showing up, that it's committing through contractual arrangements to be there. And I think that's the best way to mitigate these risks.
Yeah, certainly. So I want to take a moment here now to talk a little bit more about Markets Plus expansion, RTO West, if you're game. So we've been talking, a good deal here about infrastructure expansion and investment and the investment required to make all this happen. I would love to hear a little bit more about specifically Western Interconnection, RTO West. Tell me more about this plan. How does an expansion of this nature enhance grid reliability, enhance operational efficiency? What's the reasoning?
So the RTO expansion that we're taking on first allows us to operate the DC ties, which connect the Eastern interconnection to the Western interconnection, and allows us to not only operate those, but plan those as the RTO that will be providing service to consumers on both sides. Now, right now, that first tranche of new members um, will provide us the opportunity to operate 510 megawatts of those DC ties, which gives us essentially access to 510 megawatts of more generation than we have today. That's essentially what that looks like. And as you know, in today's time, having more generation quickly is a good thing. In terms of the market benefits, our studies have shown anywhere from 50 to $100 million of additional market savings just because we're optimizing the energy that can be exchanged through those direct current links that we have. That's the current benefit. I talked about it also gives us the ability to plan those links between the two interconnections. That's huge because to me, that's where the future is. The strategy, the strategic value of SPP being the RTO across both sides of those DC ties gives us the ability to plan for even more transmission that I believe will be cost beneficial. It'll link the East with the West much more strongly. And I think the more you can do in that regard, the more benefits you can get. Reason for that, look, if you look at what's available in the Pacific Northwest, there's a tremendous amount of hydro generation. SPP's current RTO footprint doesn't have a lot of hydro. If you look at what's happening in the desert Southwest, a lot of solar generation is being built, and they still do have a lot of thermal generation. And then, of course, we talked about the tremendous amount of wind generation that we have in the current SPP footprint. Having the ability to optimize those very, very different and diverse resources is where you get a lot of market savings. And like I said, the strategic value is even further optimized if we can build stronger transmission links between those two areas.
Yeah, it's really helpful context to understand this expansion, both from a strategic standpoint and a literal standpoint. You mentioned when we first started chatting about one of the goals of SPP to dispatch the cheapest energy possible. So let's chat more about the market specifically. Markets Plus is the Western Day Ahead in Real Time market that SPP has been championing. Can you tell me a little bit more about the impact of this market specifically on your business and what the current temperature is on the scheduled go live and all of that? What's the status right now on Markets Plus?
Well, we have 41 utilities or entities that have agreed to participate in Markets Plus, and we're now in what we call phase two, which is really the design phase. We've received the funding that we need from those 41 entities that will allow us to move forward full speed into the design and development of the systems that we're going to need to operate the Markets Plus product in the West. The support from those utilities and those entities is very high. They realize the value that they get out of regionalization. I talked about the value, and you actually brought it up as well, that we see in the East. You mentioned $3.9 billion of savings, $2.5 billion of which comes from just the market function alone. If you look at the fact that we have about 56,000 megawatts of peak load, that's pretty close to the peak load that will exist in the Markets Plus footprint. I can easily see value in the same range as what we're seeing in the East being provided to those entities in the West. And that's, again, $2.5 billion is what we're seeing today. By the way, 10 years ago, when we first estimated the value that our market would provide, we only estimated $200 million of annual savings. That was 10 years ago, but $200 million was the initial estimate. And today, we believe we're providing $2.5 billion. It's more than 10 times what we initially thought. So I think these studies, and there's a lot of people that have done studies, by the way. A lot of people have done studies in the West about the value of a market. I think a lot of times those are very conservative, as we've seen come to fruition here.
So the estimated go live for this is October of 2027, right?
2027, yep.
What happens over the next 2-ish years to make sure this goes off without a hitch? What are accelerating factors? What are speed bumps? What are you paying the most attention to over the next 2 years to make this happen?
A large part of that is just simply software development. We have our own vendors that we work with and are working with to develop the software to make this happen. Just as importantly, though, is the work that has to go on at each of the market participants' companies and what they have to do to prepare for that. So, SPP, we've had some experience with this in the past. We've started up markets and we've helped the market participants prepare for that and get ready. We'll do the same thing in the West. We've done it before, and we're just doing it again. But what we've found in the past is it's really important to work together to make sure that both SPP as the market operator and the participants are getting ready. And it's a big project. It's a huge project. It takes a lot of coordination, but that's what's going to take to make it successful.
When you mentioned the challenge of coordination across a lot of stakeholders and entities and key players here, I'm curious about size as potentially a limiting factor. When we're talking about the power needs of certain regions in the country, certain types of industries, certain utilities, their markets are all pretty unique. We have said before on this show that it seems like no utility is really a monolith. Is that a challenge when you're trying to consider something like expansion? I mentioned already the SPP footprint is large. It is quite large. How do you manage, and appropriately prioritize the differing needs of these many stakeholders to ensure that they get those needs met, but also that you can balance expansion with the idea that something big is harder to manage?
To me, the biggest factor that drives success when you're trying to put together that's something that's very large is when you have people that are of like minds working together. If you got people that don't want to make this happen, they're going to just come up with excuses and they're going to create opposition. But when you got people that want to see this happen and they're working with you diligently to make it happen, you're much more likely to have success. I've always said, look, I don't want somebody that doesn't want to be part of our team. If they don't want to be part of it, go somewhere else because it's the people that want to be part of SPP that are going to make SPP successful.
Yeah, certainly makes sense. Now, knowing that the plan here is something that is rooted in a lot of forecasting and reforecasting and reforecasting and trying your best to really understand where we're headed in the future to the extent that we can predict it. I'm curious if you think that something similar might happen in terms of expansion from your peers in the industry. Do you see any, future competition, any future strategies that might mimic what you've done at SPP? We're talking about the bigger picture. What do you anticipate from other RTOs?
Competition's good. I don't mind competition. I think it's what makes all of us better. My team knows that I'm very competitive. I want SPP to be the best. One example, one indicator of being the best is when other people try to imitate you. And look, I think we're doing some great things. We're doing some cool things, and I don't mean to sound like I'm bragging, but look, if CPP is the recipe for the rest of the world, then by all means, come on board and let's do that. It doesn't bother me if a competitor implements the same thing. If it's what's good for ratepayers, if it's what's good for our customers, why not? We've always been willing to learn from others. If people can learn from us, then we're happy to share that learning.
All right. Now, my last question for you here, when we're talking about the future of energy markets and in the broadest sense, is about regulation. I would love to just kind of get your quick take on the state of regulation, how you interact with regulators, and maybe any of the more specific speed bumps or challenges that are put in place by the current status quo when it comes to regulation. Can you tell me a little bit more about how you view this, as the leader of SPP?
Well, assuming I'm understanding your question correctly, there's regulators at FERC that we work closely with because that's who we're jurisdictional to. So clearly, I spend a lot of time, working with them, talking to them, trying to understand what they would like to see, sharing with them what we're thinking, getting their thoughts about that. That takes a lot of work, but it's well worth it because I want to make sure that if we're going to file something, it lands well. So I spent a lot of time working with our FERC regulators. But we also have a real role for the state commissions in our footprint to play. They have responsibility, and our bylaws have granted them the authority and responsibility for our resource adequacy construct, as well as for how cost of transmission upgrades are allocated to load serving entities. Those are important roles for us. I've said for years that we wouldn't have been able to get the transmission that we've gotten built without the cost allocation that our regulators came up with, without that mechanism. We call it highway byway. They came up with that. And it's so important to have the support of your states. If you're going to move forward with anything on a regional basis, and particularly on a national basis, it's important to have state support.
So as we look ahead into 2026, so much of what we've talked about today rests a lot on forecasting and understanding what comes next. Are there any big priorities that you are really excited about that we did not touch on in this conversation? What are you anticipating as we close out 2025 that 2026 might bring for SPP?
Well, yeah, the one thing that we haven't talked about that I'm really excited about is the partnership that we have with Hitachi and NVIDIA to develop a a software package that will help us automate our studies, the studies that we do. It'll automate the model building and all of the stuff that happens can get automated, and we'll use artificial intelligence to provide even better results. That partnership, we expect, will allow us to reduce the compute time for the studies that we perform by at least 80%. I'm all about speed, and I'm excited about that because that's going to allow us to not only speed up the process, but also provide better and more useful information to the customers. We spend a lot of time talking about how AI is going to create load growth for us, which is going to require transmission, right? But we haven't talked about the benefits that we can get from actually using artificial intelligence. And that's just the first step for us. That's going to help us with our planning process. But we've got a vision for deploying it in our operations environment, which will allow us to more reliably operate the grid. And so, super excited, super stoked about our transformative technology road and path that we're embarking on.
Yeah, it's certainly a fitting way to finish this conversation. We started, to your point, about this, conversation with the challenges of artificial intelligence and of tech and of the future. But it is always important to note that these things can also be accelerants. They can help us. They can make things go faster, and fast is generally a good thing. So, Lanny, if you're down, we'll transition now to just our quick little lightning round. I'll ask you a couple of questions here. We'll keep it, really quick, rapid fire. Give me an answer in a word or a sentence.
All right. Dog or
I'm
cat?
flexible. Dog, dog, dog. All right. So what is a book that you think every energy professional listening to this should read? Do you have a book recommendation?
I do. I would recommend what's called The Smartest Guys in the Room. It's a story about the rise and fall of Enron. There's even been a documentary about that. But, if you've had any history at all in this profession, that is a very compelling story, very interesting.
Okay. We'll put a link in the description in the show notes for this one. What is one energy story that we are not talking about enough? Is there a story that you think we should be having a more big picture conversation about here?
Yeah, I actually don't think we're spending enough time talking about the affordability of electricity compared to other forms of energy. Everybody is talking about affordability. It's become a buzzword, right? Everybody's concerned about how fast and how much electricity prices are rising. We're not talking about how the cost of electricity compares to the cost of other goods, the price of food, the price of eggs. Remember when that was a big deal? I think there's a story there. And I think the energy wallet is really what we should be talking more about. The energy wallet will tell you, and there's studies that have been done and projections that have been made that will tell you, yeah, the price of electricity is probably going to increase. but that's going to put downward pressure because people start using it more on other forms of energy, so that your wallet, while it may be paying more for electricity, it's going to pay less for gas and other types of energy. And in the end, I think you're going to be spending less out of your wallet for the total cost of energy. I think
Yeah,
that's a story
it's
we need to look at.
totally. It's good context on the affordability conversation. You're right, this is something that I think comes up in every conversation that we have on Power Perspective, so it's helpful context. I saw something literally this morning that, the headline was, "Energy is the new eggs." Everybody just wants to talk about the price of their electric bills at the end of the month, but, you're right, it's not just one thing. Alright, my last question for you here, Lanny. Who is one energy leader you recommend our listeners follow, check out, learn more about?
That's the one I don't have an answer for.
You could plug yourself.
There's so many of them, and they all have their own compelling versions. I could point you to any one of our board of directors who have been involved in the energy business. But I don't have just a single one. There's a lot of them out there that are really good.
Yeah, we'll toss a link to your board lineup in
There
the
you
in
go.
the show notes so people can check it
Well, if
out.
you want to hear something interesting, the chairman of our board is Ray Hepper. He used to work at the New England ISO, and he worked for, I think, maybe a day or two at ERCOT as a board member right before Winter Storm Uri happened. So
That's tough. That's
he's
tough
he's
timing.
he's got some stories.
Yeah, I can imagine. Got some good ones, I'm
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Some yeah, tough times, but, it's learn what we can from the stories of the past, from the situations of the past.
Well, and look, he wasn't there long enough to have caused it, but yet, um, all of the board members got blamed for that. And look, it's not
We
fair.
all have to deal with it.
It's
Yeah.
not fair, but that's the outcome of something that when it's extreme like that.
Yeah, yeah, and hey, increased accountability is not a bad thing, and at least we got that out of, what was, as you mentioned earlier, a pretty tragic situation.
It was. Yep.
So, Lanny, this has been just incredible. I really appreciate you shedding more light on headlines that I'm sure a lot of our listeners have seen in the Energy Central Daily newsletter, have seen online. It has been really, really wonderful to get your perspective on what the future holds, from optimizing transmission to planning for markets, and what comes next. So, I really appreciate you joining me today and sharing more of your expertise. It's been really wonderful.
Well, thank you very much. It's a dawning future, but it's more exciting than I ever imagined it would be. So thank you.
All right. And thank you to all of you for listening. As Lanny mentioned, it is an exciting future ahead. So stay tuned for more episodes of Power Perspectives by hitting subscribe wherever you are listening to this one. Thank you once again for tuning in. I'm Kinsey Grant Baker, and I will see you next time.